Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second hour of the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. I want you to please go to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, like and subscribe there, and join the conversation with the Santita Jackson Morning Stars. It is fantastic. You don't want to miss it. You don't want to miss it. As we talk about the State of the Union, what is the State of the Union? Payday to Monday. Many people don't, these paychecks are not going far enough. Sure, we've added 15 million jobs, but people are still restless, seeking relief because some things, there's a disconnect. We're being told that things are getting better, and yet people cannot afford groceries. People can't afford rent, their mortgages, can't send our kids to school, can't even gas up the car to get to school. Maybe we don't have enough money to get on the bus. That's a very real circumstance for Americans. And so we want to hear from you right here on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Let us know what should be in this address as President Biden gears up here on here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota, as he gears up for this second term. He is looking to get a second term. And yet, the majority of Americans want a ceasefire, something that he steadfastly refuses to call for. What is the deal with that? Indeed, of course, our Vice President Kamala Harris went to Selma, so full of symbolism there, and called for a ceasefire, ellipsis, ... for 6 weeks. That's not what we were asking for. And then what about student loan debt? What about the Justice and Policing Act? What about an executive order for our voting rights? What about? Of course, many people still don't know what the Inflation Reduction Act is. And it's done some good, but what should be in it, everybody? Okay, strengthening the middle class, I get that. Wanting a second term, moving into the campaign season, I get that. But what do you want? If you could write this State of the Union, if you could sit down and advise the president, what would you advise the president to do? We've got a tremendous panel here with us today. Reverend Dwight McKee, Dean of the Ma'afa Redemption Project, brilliant social scientist, senior advisor to Dr. Cornel West in his presidential bid. And of course, we've got Reverend Dr. Todd Yeary from the national leadership team of Rainbow Push, senior pastor of the iconic Douglas Memorial Community Church. He's also a great lawyer. So glad that he was able to make time for us today. Dr. Julianne Malveaux, a president emeritus of Bennett College for Women, a brilliant economist, former dean of ethnic studies at Cal State, LA, and of course, Wisconsin State Representative Lakeisha Myers. You can help us to, legislatively, you can help us to understand what we need to be looking for, particularly in this season. But you know what, Josh? You're back with us today, and I'm so glad that you're with us. Josh Feinstein, of course, of Jewish Voice for Peace Action. Let me start with you. Gaza's on everyone's mind. He said there's going to be a port that we're going to build so we can get supplies in and out. There was this drop of 38,000, I guess, meals or something that was supposed to help the Gazans, but we're not letting anything of substance in. We're trying to get them out of Gaza. We're not trying to help them while they're in Gaza at home. State of the Union, what should be in it?
So it's interesting when you ask that. What I thought is normally every time there's a State of the Union, the first opening is the proverbial leader at the time will say, the State of the Union is strong, the State of the Union is good, and the State of the Union is great. And that's usually what they open with. If I were, quote, the leader of the so-called free world, I would actually get up and say, good evening, everyone. Candidly, we've got problems. And we need to address them. Instead of starting out and saying everything is great, and then let me address a couple of things that we're working on, I would actually be much more forthright and say, the situation is untenable. When you look at what's going on in Gaza and the subjugation of the people there and the ethnic cleansing, yes, there are some positive movements But those positive movements are in inches. They're in inches, and we need positive movements in yards and football fields. So it's interesting when you say that. What would you address the State Union? I would say I would give a pause after that, and I'd let people also give a moment for people in their mind to think about what are the main things that really need to be addressed. From my purview, it is an immediate permanent ceasefire in Gaza. The idea of a 6-week pause is not acceptable. It is not acceptable. It is we are better than this as a society, as humanity. We are better than this. So I think in terms of that, I'm just going to pause there and maybe then defer to the other panelists, because that's how I would open it with from my purview. But I think I'll pass the baton. I'm very eager to hear other points of view.
Well, because that's on everyone's mind. Wisconsin State Representative Lakeisha Myers, you need funding, you need money, but we're cutting checks to go to these wars every place else, and yet Americans are really struggling. But what are you hearing in your district and as you're talking to other legislators around the country?
Well, I think similar to what Josh said, it is most definitely the people are hurting, and they're feeling this every day. We talked about the price of food being as high as it is and constantly going up, whether family members are able to sustain a basic quality of life. But then you turn on the news and you see that, we are spending billions with no strings attached, really, when it comes to Israel. And we are funding their munitions and all of these other things that they're doing to basically kill other people. And we know that what the result is 30,000. The last time I checked, it may have gone up since then, of individuals that have been killed in Gaza alone. But I think that's something that we need to think about and ask the hard questions. I've run into issues when I've raised questions in my own state as a state legislator about calling for a ceasefire, and people want to say, well, you sound like you're anti-Semitic. I said, no. I'm just critical of just spending money with no strings attached. You have to have, when you look at the UN, and I'm just going to say this, Santita, when I see a Black woman, and love Linda Greenfield to death, but when I sit there and look with all the other countries calling for a ceasefire, but America raises its hand and says, no, we're the veto vote that stops that from happening over and over and over again. So we cannot justify, our participation in this genocide. I think we're looking at that. Other people said this is not who we are. It's exactly who we are. Because I remember in 85, 86, Grenada, we bombed them because it was not, the American way. We want to spread democracy in the way that looks well to us.
And killed Maurice Bishop.
Exactly, killed Maurice Bishop. So it's not like we haven't done it before. We do what we want to do. So I'm not going to say that's not who we are. Manifest destiny exists for a reason. That's exactly why the president would say the State of the Union is great, because it's always great in America's eyes, because we are right 100% of the time. That's the way we project. But I think we're seeing those fractures. You see the fractures in that a lot. And the people are not happy with it. So when the public when the official narrative differs from the people every day, you're going to have a Vietnam type situation on your hands. I wasn't there for that, but I've heard that the public didn't agree with the war that was happening, so it started to have some contention. I see that with having protests, pro-Palestine protests all across the country. These are not just college students that are protesting. These are old people, young people, everybody. We understand what's happening when you see the death toll rising every day. And, we can drop some food here. We can have a 6-week ceasefire, but we're not going to do anything to stop it and do what we need to do with Benjamin Netanyahu. I saw that Benny Gantz was meeting with Kamala Harris last week or earlier this week. So we want to see what happens with that. But, I've seen the United States move people out of the way who were not of use to them. It'll be interesting to see what happens in Israel.
I'd like to just respond to two excellent points that were made there, if I may. One is about this notion of anti-Semitism, which, as a proud American Jew, I believe anti-Semitism is real, and I believe it exists. However, disagreeing with the state of Israel is not anti-Semitic. Disagreeing with an apartheid situation is not anti-Semitic. And I would even say that as we tend to focus on Israel and conflate what's going on with anti-Semitism, we actually are exposed, as Jews, we are exposing ourselves to real anti-Semitism. We're actually making ourselves weaker. So coming back to that, it really is, I think that's one thing I want to get across to the listeners, that to say I'm pro-Palestinian and to say I don't agree with a genocide, to say that I don't think we should be funding weapons to Israel, in some ways, that's the most Jewish thing you could say. That is the true meaning of tikkun olam, of actually lifting people up, of the betterment of society. So I thank you very much for bringing that up in when you were talking. I'll pass for the moment. Thank you.
No, I mean, I think it's important. That's why we have this platform, Dr. Malvo, because it gives people an opportunity to have this conversation. State Representative Myers and Reverend Dr. Yuri and Dwight McKee, Reverend McKee, because that quiet part needs to be said out loud. People are having that conversation also. It's important. You know,
and it causes consternation too, Santita. I would say that as a public official,
yes,
we had a resolution shortly after October 7th happened, and I didn't vote for the resolution because of the language that was used in the resolution in Wisconsin, because it was used basically as political bait. Like, if you didn't vote for, oh, you're an anti-Semite, that was going to happen. I was like, no, so we just go abstain and not do anything. And of course, that made the news too. But it was like, why didn't you do that? I was like, because you can't say that this was unprovoked behavior, or say, this side is right all the time. All of those things were going on. So that, and it causes a lot of consternation as this is going on, with people trying to say in the community, well, if you don't agree, then you must be against the state of Israel. That is how that has been framed for a lot of people.
Well, the state of Israel has been a bully, quite frankly, in terms of any number of things. Certainly the treatment of Palestinians, but more than that, their attempt to massage the public dialogue so that they're anti-Israel, not even anti-Israel, but critical of Israel, then you're anti-Semitic. And anti-Semitic is something that nobody wants to be. I mean, no one wants to say, oh yeah, I'm anti-Semitic, but we have to acknowledge that the very roots of Israel are flawed. We have to acknowledge the role that the Brits played in the creation of Israel. One of the fun facts, not a fun fact, but an interesting fact, is that they initially wanted to put Israel in Uganda. Mm-hmm. And I always find the Mau Mau's would have had enough of that. This would not be a conversation right now. But you were going to appropriate Ugandan land and turn that into Israel. The Brits were desperate to have some place for Jewish people to go, and that's fine. But then what they did was they did not set up the terms and conditions for peaceful coexistence, which could have happened. When I did my senior honors thesis, this was 50 years ago, so forgive me, or 45, whatever, on the UN commanders who basically commandeered international forces in the Middle East. There were like 4 books by 4 different guys. One was from Denmark. Anyway, to a person, they talked about Israel's aggression. From Front Street, Israel's aggression. And so we have to be very, very mindful of that. Now, Netanyahu has roundly rejected the notion of a 2-state solution. Mm-hmm. And a 2-state solution is the only way. You're not just going to put Palestinians off all their land. So the 2-state solution is the answer. But basically, again, Netanyahu is a bully. Israeli politics are dominated by Netanyahu. And so we end up with this. And what we also end up with, the United States, we're sending weapons now undercover. We're sending weapons that our tax dollars are paying for the destruction of Gaza. And we need to be able to say that there should be no form of censorship at all around this issue. What I would like to hear President Biden talk about, I like what you said, Josh, about they always say the State of the Union is great. But I would say the State of the Union is mixed. And that's the exact term that I was using. It's mixed. There's good news, and I would lead with the economy because that's what most people are very concerned about. But it's economic good news if you live in a macro world, but it's bad news if you live in a micro world. If you live in a macro world, you're looking at inflation dropping, you're looking at a number of other things happening that seem good. But if you are median income 50 grand or below, you're not having a good time. There's a lot of challenges. And while so to say that inflation is dropping is meaningless when the price of groceries has gone up by 26% in a 4-year period. You can say, oh, well, inflation is dropping. Well, it's not dropping for food, not dropping for eggs. Earlier this week, we talked about cereal, not dropping for cereal, although some man tells us, let us eat flakes. The gasoline prices had gone down, and now they're heading back up. And that's going to be an issue. We're coming up on summer, and and again, the words, he won't use these words, but I would love it if he would say predatory capitalism is ruining our country. Now, like I said, he's not going to say that because he's in the arms of the capitalists. But somebody needs to call out the structural issues that have us where we are. I do hope that he'll mention race, but he doesn't have to, especially if it's one of these cursory wink and a nod and I checked off the box, which is likely to be. But if he were to get more structural, I would be happy. But I think if he's honest about the economy, he will say the state of the union is mixed. You can't say it's good when you still have hunger in this country. You can't say it's good when you have homelessness. When you have corporations buying up single family homes, fixing them up, and they're renting them at exorbitant prices, which has contributed to our homelessness. So I just wish he would be honest. Yes, he could talk about, there are many accomplishments of this administration, and he should lift them up. Well, but he can't talk about the orange man being a threat to democracy without making us understand why.
But don't call him Orange Man.
What you want me to call him?
No. He's the former president. Let me tell you something. No. Let me say this, because I don't do pejoratives here, only because I don't want anyone to use one against anyone here. And I think we've got to elevate the conversation. And you are one of the most brilliant minds I know. And his policies are enough. We can deal with that. We can deal with that.
I try not to cuss during the day, Santita.
Well, look,
cussing.
I've already had one station want to do away with "Don't hurt me."
So, one thing that was hit on that was interesting was, the idea that, and we all know how money is running politics and running policy. Here in Michigan, we have, I think about, a fellow named Nasser Baidoun, who's put his hat in the ring to run for Senate. And the reason he's doing that is he's saying, something, I'm going to do my best to try to get the money out of politics, because if I can make some headway with that, we can see some real change. And that's what I was thinking about, what came to mind, we're talking in terms of how do you get to the root of the problem? Mm-hmm. Try to get people in those halls of power who are going to be trying to get, I don't know if we'll ever get money out of the equation, but try to at least make that attempt to remove money from the equation,
Well, it should be publicly funded. Because it should not be subject to these predators who own the people who own our offices. It's a horrible thing. I've had 2 brothers in Congress. You walk in owning the DNC 6 figures. And if you don't come up with that money, you can't get on the right committees. It's just this. It's a horrible thing that the system has been completely perverted and disrupted. Reverend Dr. Yeary, what do you want to hear in this State of the Union? What if you could write it? What would you put in it?
If I could write it, what I would put in it would depend on what I'm looking at, right? The first thing I'm thinking about is first rule of communication is know your audience. The problem with the State of the Union address is that there are audiences, so it's not a monolith. Mm-hmm. He's going to have to communicate across demographic lines, across particular interests. He's going to have to touch on a number of concerns that will range from kind of personal domestic policy, as Dr. Malveaux was talking about, the macro versus micro, that's going to be across these demographic lines. There's going to be macroeconomic interests. There's going to be microeconomic interests. There's going to be political interests at the macro and micro level that he's going to have to speak to. And then he's going to have to talk to the institutional issues that he's going to have to face, simply because he's going to be talking to both chambers of Congress who actually stand between him and whatever it is he wants to try to achieve between now and November, actually between now and the summer break, before the House and the Senate go home for the election. And so really he's on basically a 90-day clock, give or take, to be able to get a lot accomplished. And wherever he is come that summer break just before the 4th of July is where he's going to be stuck. That's going to be status quo until after you see the outcome of the election. And then you go into a lame duck Congress, depending on who wins in November, after the political and the legal wrangling that is going to take place, because there are going to be challenges across the board that we're going to have to endure. So what he's going to have to do is be very forthright and clear. What I will say is, as one who has to stand in reality, but also proclaim hope on a regular basis, it's not an either or proposition. It is, I think, as Josh has laid out and State Rep Myers has said, is you have to indicate that you are a realist and a pragmatist, but you also have to be an optimist, because if despair sets in, that's going to be probably the biggest hindrance, because the conversation is now shifting from having these monolithic conversations with the base to now you're going to have more of a centrist conversation with the electorate. If it is to be conceded that Trump is the presumptive nominee on the Republican side and the president is the presumptive nominee on the Democratic side, well, now they're going to have to speak to the leading group in the plurality, the center, and be able to have a credible conversation with them that they believe is going to be deliverable. Otherwise, you're going to be looking at a stalemate. And at that point, you're probably in a most precarious situation, because to go before this Supreme Court with any level of uncertainty about what the outcome of the general election might be is going to leave a 6-3 court against the interest of progress to basically say, look, we get to lean in and determine who's going to be the president, not the people. And that's a very, very real possibility that I think we have to be intentional about speaking to, so that this notion of abstaining in November is not something that we would necessarily proclaim. We're not telling you who to vote for, but we are telling you, along with who's going to get elected president, are going to be a number of ballot initiatives. There are going to be a number of issues that are going to require public funding. There are going to be some down ballot issues in elections that we're going to have to speak to. And so we got to play Monopoly as the rules are set, not as we wish the rules were. We've got to work to change them. And until we change them, we got to play to win as the rules are. So that's where I would leave it for the president. Be focused, be serious. And I don't know what that is or where it's coming from. And I hope it's not me.
Hang on. Hold on. Okay. Now you can come back.
Is that better now?
Reverend Dr. Yuri?
Can you hear me?
There's a lot of crunching going on.
And I don't know where it came from. It just started. And so I don't think.
Let me. I know this happened in my last hour, which is all right. Let me test you out, Dwight.
Hello.
Reverend
I don't think it's me.
Yeah, we're having.
Interesting.
Okay, wait a minute. Okay. Let's see what's going on here. Okay, everybody stay tuned for more of the Santita Jackson Show. We're working out some audio issues. This is quite bizarre, but that's all right. Things happen. What are we going to do? All right. Reverend Dr.
So modern technology making our life easier, in air quotes, right?
Let me see if State Representative Myers, if we're still having something.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
We're having a tough time here, so let me just try and figure out what's going on. And okay, we're going to try this John, hear you. Okay, I think this is we just got some bugs in the machine, but we're gonna keep on going. Everybody, Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, and let's hear what your thoughts are about the State of the Union address. What is the State of the Union? What about making it from payday to Monday? I want to know what you're thinking. Dr. Julianne Malveaux, the brilliant Dr. Julianne Malveaux, President Emeritus of College for Women, made the point that, the economic issues which have driven everybody to the point of distraction, you have to look at them on the macro and micro level. Big picture. Yeah, there's some improvements in the economy. But when you get down to how we're all living from day to day, buying eggs is a struggle, let alone a chicken. Buying vegetables, frozen or fresh, it's a struggle. People are struggling. Yeah, we've added 15 million jobs, but what kind of jobs are they? I mean, really, in slavery, Reverend Jesse Jackson has often said, in slavery, you had a 100% employed economy. I think we need to look at where we're going. Was that you, Dr. Malveaux? I kind of think that might have hit you where you live. Okay, talk to me.
We really don't look at the types of jobs. As you said, I think the key issue is the types of jobs. Pay is not moving as quickly as inflation is. People are not able to keep up. And so I've heard Reverend say that many times, 100% employment and enslavement. But what we really also need to talk about are the terms and conditions of work. This is something we haven't been paying attention to for a very long time. So the job is the prize. But what kind of job is it? In 24 states, the minimum wage is still $7.25. That is a poverty wage. And people brag about, President Biden brags about how many jobs he's created, but he hasn't done anything with employment regulation like OSHA and other things where basically people that have decent jobs. Now, I get it. The states often have to pass this legislation, and conservative states are not inclined to do that. In fact, state by state, you see, I was just on the phone with some folks in Seattle where the minimum wage is $17 an hour. Here in Washington, D.C., 16 and change. But in Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, the official minimum wage is $7.25, and often they're paying people less than that. And then there's this thing called wage theft, where you punch out of your job, and then you spend the next hour cleaning up your station, and you're not being paid for that. You punch out for the 8 hours, and then you're working actually 9 hours. And the concept is called wage theft, and it especially happens in the big box stores where you're dinged if your station is left messy. So when we talk about employment, there's so many nuances. And the most recent nuance, of course, is the extent to which certainly in Florida and in other states, they're eliminating DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in eliminating this, there are two effects. Number one, you find women of color disproportionately represented in those jobs. Black women, Latinx women, more likely represented in those jobs. But number two, nobody is watching the hen house. And so where before people were looking at EEO-1 forms, looking at what the workplace composition is, raising questions. Should we be recruiting someplace else? Should we start recruiting at HBCUs as an example? And, we basically are, if you don't have any DEI people, you're not going to have that. And then speaking of HBCUs, our institutions are under such assault these days, especially in Mississippi. They want to try to get 3 schools to merge, require them to merge. Now, this is a 30-year argument. We thought it had gone away with Ayers, but no, it's back. In Texas, some of the same things are happening. And let's not even talk about Florida, where, FAMU, they're talking about a merger between FAMU and Florida State. The places are not even contiguous. So, basically attempting to cut all of our southern institutions are under attack because they're red states with conservative leaders who basically would not mind if Black people just disappeared, or if we didn't disappear, just shut up.
Well, then let me ask you this very quickly before I go back to Reverend Dr. Yeary. So, because I think we've got this sound issue worked out, and Reverend McKee. Should the president, is it his role to address that in the
Yes.
State of the Union address? Very quickly, why?
HBCUs represent 4% of our nation's colleges and universities. They represent education for almost 20% of our African American young people. There's no reason for him not to address it unless he just doesn't care. Kamala has done a good job as a Howard University grad of talking about many of these things, but it needs to be talked about a lot more. And the fact is that if our HBCUs are fiscally unstable, it's because of the benign neglect of the federal government repeatedly.
Reverend Dr. Yuri, you were in the middle of these brilliant remarks. I was having you put pen to paper, and sit in the room with the president, given your vast array of experiences. You're the pastor of one of the most iconic churches in the country, national leadership team of Rainbow Push. You're also a lawyer of growing renown. You're also in Baltimore, city that we see a lot of struggle. But you're also spending time in Chicago. I mean, you have such breadth and depth of experiences. What should he say, particularly in this moment?
Well, I give you a quote from another moment where there was a major platform discussion, and the resonance was grounded in two words: I understand. I'm often taken back to Reverend Jackson's, what we would call his riff at the National Convention, when he started speaking right to the circumstances of his audience.
In 1988.
In 1988. You know, when he could speak to it and say, I can relate to you. I understand you. I am a part of you. And therefore, we're going to be able to work through these things together. I still think, and certainly I know Big Brother Dwight McKee is going to have some insights. I do think he's got to start with Joshua's point. He's got to be a realist. He can't come in and give this glossy picture. But at the same time, he's got to say, this is the reality. We aren't where we want to be. We're not where we were. Pragmatically, these are the things that we need to do. And then he's got to be optimistic in the sense that we can do this if we do it together, and then put the pressure on those who have their own levers of control. And that would be the members of Congress who are sitting in front of them. And indirectly, he can speak to the court, but he can't really talk. He can't tell the justices what to do. But I think he has to make sure that the justices hear him clearly about what the political intentions are going to be from the executive, so that when these cases will eventually get to him, right? UNC and Harvard eventually got to the Supreme Court. The challenges to the Voting Rights Act are getting to this court, that he's got to make it clear in their presence and speak directly to the members of Congress that we're not going to back away from the principles of full participation for everybody. And so if that's what you want to advance, here's my track record. Yes, I've got some blemishes like everybody else, but here's the reality. Here's where we're going. And here's why I am the one to be able to help lead us there with another 4 years in office.
Reverend McKee.
Well, I like to see him lay out, and we've been talking about it for years and years. It's never been dealt with, a domestic Marshall Plan that addresses the issues of Black America and Native America, people whose labor they stole and people whose land they stole. We have done that for everybody else. We did that for Europe. We did that for Japan. We're doing that for the Ukraine. We're doing it for Israel. We've never done it for the people we've most violated. What I'm afraid he's going to do, though, is he's going to try to appeal to the center. And the energy and the momentum is on the left. He needs the left to be responsive to him. But his instincts is to appeal to the center. And the center is not going to respond to him. They may not keep responding to Trump, but they're never going to respond to him. And so he misses a great opportunity to bring a whole new energy into the process. And it's the only energy, it's the only base that can take him over the top. That's the base he's losing now. The young people, black men, um, some black women, not as many as it is with black men, and the Arab crowd, and even a lot of the immigrant crowd is kind of unimpressed with his approach to that. That's the base he needs to win, particularly where their electoral uh, continuity needs to be developed. Like in the Michigans and the states, the border states, the states that he really needs to win. Many of them now are kind of either leaning toward not voting or leaning toward independent candidates. That's who he has to make a point to, and I don't see him doing that. I see him playing to the center.
I don't think he has to do that tonight.
Okay.
I see this in two phases. I started out by saying there are multiple audiences, and so they're really a sequence of votes that this president is going to need. The first set of votes come out of the legislative branch. He's got about 90 days to move his agenda to wherever it's going to position him for what's going to be the second 90 to 120 days, which is the run up to the conventions and then to the general election. He's got to build his report card out. And so if he goes too extreme to one side or the other, he's not going to get his legislative agenda moved on. And I think there is a way to communicate and message so that he gets the Congress to be responsive to what he's saying. Because on one hand, the left does not want to see him shut down the border. But the reality is the border chaos that he's handed off to the vice president as the boondoggle for her to wrestle with is unmanageable short of legislative engagement, right? So he's got to get them to move. The economy is hurting everybody. You don't have to go one way or the other, but to Dr. Malvo's point, gas is high for everybody. Food is high for everybody. Electricity is high for everybody. And even with a strong job market, when in reality, the wages are still lagging what they need to be for livable wages for those we would call the working poor, we need to have that conversation, right? Because at the end of the day, that's the reality. If at the end of that 90 days, he's put forth the agenda and said, this is where the Congress needs to move, that's where he gets the wind at his back to say, not only am I the person to keep championing these causes, these are the culprits that you need to get out of office too when we go, since all 435 in the House on the ballot, 1/3 of the Senate is on the ballot. And the biggest issue we've had for the last 4 years is that the margins in the House and the Senate have been so tight, with the filibuster still sitting in place on the Senate side, that you can't really move a progressive agenda with the numbers being what they are. And so he's got to really be careful and in some ways really crafty to be able to speak to the pain, address the immediacy of the opportunity, talk to the audience that he needs to have responsive right now, Congress, but then also tee up the conversations he needs to have with the people to get them to address not only his reelection, but also who's going to be sitting in the legislature to be able to move his agenda after the election. He's got to do both.
Well, Josh,
One of the things that needs to happen
Okay.
is he has to become a better PR person for himself.
Mhm.
And I understand that tonight, after the State of the Union, tomorrow, many cabinet members are going to be here and there, basically to promote the accomplishment, but he has to promote them himself as well. He has to be willing and able to say, this is what I did, y'all. This is what I did. I forgave this much student loan. Now, so I won't say it's not enough, but it's more than what you had. And moving down the list, I think he needs to do that. What he has been, he is a man of his generation from the perspective that he doesn't toot his own horn. You know, that's a generation. They don't. They do the work, but he's got to toot his own horn, and especially in the social media context. And he should not be afraid. He shouldn't get into the mud with the previous president. Isn't that much better, Santita? The previous president. He should get into the mud with the man, but he should not be afraid to call him a liar when he's a liar. He should not be afraid to say that's just not the truth. Because basically, Republicans have a bad habit of repeating themselves until people believe it because they've heard it so many times. And so not only he, but members of Congress have to say, excuse me, but that's just, not the truth. And I think that we need to see him. I mean, his age is his age, and I'm not mad at him. 81 is a beautiful number of years, and let's applaud him for that. And he says, when he wants to be, he's as sharp as a tack, but he's not always as sharp as a tack. And he needs to exude vigor, vitality. He needs to speak with enthusiasm. And And one of the ways that people have reacted to him shows our own antipathy toward disability. When people talk about him mumbling, the man is a stutterer. He was born a stutterer. That's part of his verbal presentation. But for the record, I wish that some of my colleagues in the news media will point out that the previous president is not exactly the most articulate person that we've ever heard speak. He gets Pelosi mixed up with Nikki Haley. I mean, that's a big mix-up.
Look, with Biden, he looks frail. It's not his age. We don't mind Bernie Sanders. He's the most popular elected official in the United States. He does not look like he is well. That is the problem. If they would address that, then we could move on. I mean, ageism, they've given us that to throw the argument, and they just need to stop. He does not look like he's
I don't think he looks frail. I just think he moves slow.
No, he sounds like he's not. He looks like he's not well. I mean, to me. And to other people, and enough, because the thing is, we also cannot penalize people for having health struggles. You don't send people out to pasture because they are struggling, whatever it is. I mean, it's just, but for heaven's sake, address it head on and let's move on. But let me ask you, Joshua. I mean, because you Jewish Voice for Peace Action in Michigan. I mean, you had a 21-day campaign. Okay, we're gonna really work for 10,000 votes. You got 101,000 votes, and you just got almost 20% of uncommitted up in Minnesota. This is something that is growing. Clearly, something needs to happen here. I mean, Reverend McKee said the center is not going to hold. Reverend Uri said, well, but he's got to speak to all of these disparate pieces, which kind of puts you in the center. What do you see?
So all the conversation here has been very salient and intelligent and relevant. But I think the key thing here is just what you said. We are living in a post-February 27th world. And February 27th proved that if you're the man in charge, you cannot sit back and watch a genocide take place. If you do, you will forfeit the White House in November. And the numbers show that. He won Michigan by 150K in 2020. And we had 101 just at this 21-day campaign that showed up and said, I don't think so. In Georgia, he won by 12,000 votes. Okay? The conversation is not so much of what is going to happen in November. But I'd like to pose to the panelists here the notion at this point of perhaps step aside, Joe, for the sake of democracy. Please step aside, Joe. And I know that's a rather loaded thing to bring to this conversation, but I'd like to pivot to that because honestly, I think we've proven that for those of us who actually used to be loyal Joe Biden people and Democrats, we're not going to be able to commit to vote for him. And so the notion of him stepping aside before it's too late and bringing in someone who can carry the ticket to victory, I think is very attractive. So I'm raising that to the group to hear the response, because I know there are a lot of people on the call who are very, very very pro Joe Biden, and I used to be. So I'm very curious about their point of view when I raise that question at this point. Maybe step aside, Joe. What are the thoughts there?
You're sounding like Norman Solomon to me. I love Mr. Solomon.
Well, they wanted to call it abandoned Biden. I thought that was too harsh. I think step aside, please.
John, I just don't think that that's a practical solution at this point in the calendar. I mean, I think that if this step aside, Joe, or even a few Democratic challengers earlier on, I think that might have been useful, but it's March.
Hmm.
Now it's harrowing to consider what if something did happen. Who would be the Democratic nominee?
Here's that question. Here's the problem. The inclusive Democratic Party ain't inclusive enough to say that the person we chose to run with Joe to help Joe get over the hump 4 years ago is not who we will turn to if Joe steps aside. That's the obvious conversation that they're not willing to have, and they're just not going to go there. And there are two problems with Kamala Harris overtly that the Democratic Party keeps trying to pretend doesn't exist as part of its own myopia. Number one, it is still a very sexist party, A, and B, it is still a very racist party. And so when you deal with those two realities, the comparison has been we're just not as sexist, not as racist as the Republican Party continues to be, and therefore we get to label ourselves as progressive. So that's the issue why stepping aside would be so chaotic as to pulling all of the blinders off and the hoods out the trunk to be able to deal with the realities of what we deal with.
I respect what you're saying, especially about what being a Michigander now, or adopted Michigander, seeing the racism, how it's in terms of how Arab Americans have been treated for the past 20 years and more in this country is something that is also incredibly, it makes my blood boil. But I think I just come back to those numbers, is that you're saying, hey, if we have Joe step aside, it's too late now. I would respectfully submit to you that if we look at those numbers, if he stays in, it's probably already too late. And I'm just talking from the numbers. Go ahead.
I agree with you, Josh.
Dwight?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Josh. It's probably too late, one way or another. His numbers are they are at all-time low, and he does not have the kind of charisma that can reverse that. I mean, this is a make and break speech tonight, and everybody's on pins and needles, but for almost the wrong reasons. Is that Democrats on the pins and needles are saying, I hope that he does not blunder to the point of, of self-destruction. And the Republicans are sitting around with their fingers crossed saying, I hope that he expresses himself like he has been, and people can see how frail and disorientated he is. And so the substance of the speech in this situation is less important than the delivery itself. And so logic would say, given that reality, that he would step aside for the benefit of, the potentiality of a victory. But Yuri is right. The racism in the Democratic Party won't allow that to happen because Kamala is in the wings. And if she's not the choice, then their black base is going to revolt, particularly black women.
Oh, yes. This is going to go wild.
They're not willing to go there.
I think black men would too.
Oh, yeah. I just said particularly black women would revolt because they would take it so much more personal. And then the party did a great job of locking out any competition. And so by not having debates, not allowing other candidates to have options, then they've locked themselves into a corner.
Wait a minute, Dwight. I only have like 2.5 minutes left. While Robert Kennedy is getting on the ballot in key states, and he's getting 25, almost 30% of the vote, you can't ignore that. And locking out Dr. Cornel West, you can't ignore that. I mean, these are people, State Representative Keisha Myers. I mean, because you got to go out on the hustings. Because all y'all are running for office. How do you do this? I've got about 1.5 minutes for you, Representative Myers, Wisconsin State Representative Myers. Although in Chicago, we're not letting you go.
Okay, but I think you have
He's
to
from
look at it.
Chicago, everybody.
It's
Thank you very
good to
much.
have an option during the primary, but I agree with Dr. Malvo that that ship has sailed. We have a nominee. I'm just going to be honest with you. We have a nominee, and it's Joe Biden. And whatever surrogates he needs to pull out of his hat, he needs to pull them out of his hat to give the receipts and tell the story, whether they black, white, indifferent. And I would urge people, and this is just me, you know, when you look at it for what it is, the electoral process, step aside for who and step aside for what? That's Donald Trump. And no, ma'am, no, sir, no, no, not him. So I mean, that's not gonna work, because the logic, the likelihood of Cornel West getting elected is slim to none. The likelihood of Kennedy getting elected is slim to none. Marianne Williamson, whoever else pretending they running for president at this point.
Yeah, but
It's
Well,
to
it's
raise their candidacy.
But sis, they will get votes. They will get votes.
They'll get votes.
30
Right.
seconds.
Yeah, but
30
not
and
enough
those
seconds.
they will affect the outcome.
Well, it's
Right.
one thing. It's one
And that
thing
may
to get.
split
It's
a
one.
vote at
It's
the
one.
end between the two of the main, contenders. That's what I'm saying. So I think their candidacy is more to raise issues and pull, like Dr. Yuri said, away from that centerism of issues. Cornel West is going to pull folks, further and say, you need to be doing more. I can see that for that type of candidacy. And that's what you lean on in that point.
Well, all I'm
15,
saying is that it's
15.
one thing. All I'm saying, real quickly, is one thing to get a rabbit out of a hat. Is another thing to get a hat out of a rabbit. And, and, and that's what you're looking at in this one.
Oh gosh. Lord, you know what? Okay, thank you, Dwight. Let me push mute. We don't. I don't know what else to say.
It's an
Write it
appropriate
down.
metaphor.
Write
It
it
is a very
down.
appropriate
Write it
metaphor.
down.
Easy,
Write it down.
easy. I love you, everybody. The Santita Jackson Show, AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota, and the Santita Jackson Show on YouTube. I love you. God bless you. See you on Monday. You know what? Let me tell you.